So our mission at TeachFX is to promote more meaningful and equitable student voice in the classroom. And we do that by empowering teachers with personalized feedback on their teaching and customized professional learning, or PD workshops. Our mission is anchored in these three key learning principles that are super important to us. So the first is student voice. We know, based on almost five and a half decades of research, that students need to speak in order to learn, that those who participate more learn more. But we also have research that shows us from John Hattie that teachers talk almost 75% of classes on average. So we feel like this student voice piece is a huge lever for us to drive change. The second key learning principle is all about equity. We know that special populations, those are, our students with disabilities, our multilingual learners, our students of color, our students from low SES backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. Those students benefit the most from speaking in class, but are given far fewer opportunities to do so than their peers. And then the third key principle is really around feedback. In order to improve, teachers need frequent feedback that is objective and non-judgmental. And we can provide that with TeachFX. So the way that it works is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Teachers record audio of their lesson on their phone, their tablet or laptop, anything with a working microphone. And then TeachFX uses voice AI to analyze the talk, the discourse patterns in their class. And once teachers finish a recording, they get a class report that's going to highlight and show them all kinds of insights on what just happened in the class. Things like talk ratios, how much time was the teacher talking, how much time were individual students talking, group wait time, things like questioning, open-ended questioning, more ping pong style questions, wait time or think time, and more. And then we couple that amazing and really innovative technology with professional learning that is going to help teachers really build their capacity to engage students in meaningful learning. And you're seeing 4 of the strands of professional learning workshops that we provide, but we really work with schools and districts to customize what they need. And the results speak for themselves. We know the more teachers are engaging with TeachFX and using it, the more their students are talking. So even with just getting started with the recording, we see teachers or students talking. All right, let's see if I can mute that voice. Yeah, and so that is an overview of who we are. I also just want to now kind of get ready here to dig in with Amy. Sorry. Again, can you guys still see my screen? I'm having some serious, okay, great. Just want to make sure that I'm doing what I want to do. So yeah, these questions here, these reflection questions are meant to just kind of anchor our thinking and guide our thinking today. How do you define student engagement in your math classroom? How can instructional coaching be more teacher-centered? And what one new idea will you bring back to try? So hopefully those are just kind of have them in the back of your mind as we talk today. I also want to just add one more thing before I go to the next slide, which is here at TeachFX, we're all about conversation. We're all about discourse and talk. And we would really love to have, as much as we want to hear from Amy, we also want to hear from you. So please, share out and raise your hand, put questions in the chat. Rachel from our team is going to be looking at that. I'm going to have a harder time doing that while doing this, but we hope that you'll engage with us. You can put reactions. We want to see your faces if you're comfortable and able to go off camera. We like to see you. We want to engage with you. All right. So let's kind of set the stage for the conversation, Amy. I'm ready to be done talking for a while. Will you kind of give us a picture of what your goals were in Jordan this past year?
Well, I love that. So one of our first biggest goals doing is to bring joy back to mathematics. So every time we do any sort of professional development, it is very important to me that we make it a joyful, really awesome experience. So that teachers feel this love inside of the math classroom. But also, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide.
Yes, love to.
So also when they look at that is that we're tying it back to the 8 mathematical practices. And so really we want kids to like persevere in solving problems and construct viable arguments. But we know with that core change of happening that if we want them to do that, we have to employ effective teaching practices. So if I just said, I want you to talk more and do more talking, teachers are not sure what to do, and so we need to couple that with effective teaching practices while they're learning that. So we are coupling it with like short instructional routines that help them be able to do that so that you can build and facilitate more mathematical meaningful discourse. And also tying that with the 5 equity-based math teaching practices about affirming mathematical learners' identities, so that it really is that everyone is a math person and it is such a possibility. So going after that mindset, because we know that people can't change their practice if they have different beliefs. So it needs to actually have some where you're actually looking at those beliefs that hold teachers back or move teachers forward with thinking about how kids can learn math and how it should be taught in the classroom. And we tied this directly with Hattie's effect size, that feedback is super important and it has a high effect size, and same with academic discourse. So those were our general whole goals of going forward of how we designed things.
Thank you so much for sharing. And you want to talk a little bit about how this might have been like specifically for elementary versus secondary, or how you were thinking about it different across the district? Like those were big picture. And do you have any more specifics here? Yeah.
Would you mind going to one of my next slides?
Yeah.
So when we thought about this, we thought really we need to personalize our approach of doing this. And so we thought this is going to be great if we have something where we're doing it with like elementary and we were doing it with secondary as well. But the approach had to be completely different. Our elementary has gotten a lot of PD in mathematics over the last years of doing it, and our secondary hasn't had as much PD of doing it. And so it's how do we couple that? So first, for our elementary, we decided to create clubs of people working together, and that was clubs with a video. So we wanted to have them videotape themselves doing these instructional practices. So it's short practices. So they were doing number talks, 3-act tasks, and the 5 practices. But the only way they could join this club is if they joined with their instructional coach from their school, which was phenomenal for us because our instructional coaches were literacy coaches in the past. And this is their first year transforming into math coaches. So to have the new coaches and the teachers as a collaborative team. So we had like our schools join together and for the 3rd through 6th grade and discuss this as a team with videoing. But we found that we really needed something to give feedback in a meaningful way so that those coaches could really take it to the next level. And that's where Tgfx was our magic bullet. So then they could videotape themselves and they're watching their videotape, but they need this feedback that can make it more powerful. So then they coupled the videotape with also looking at their reflection. So in elementary, that showed tremendous, you can see in our videos from the first to the end of the year, it showed a lot of gains by just having it designed that way. And for us, it created this great connection at the district level that wasn't there before, that we kind of saw the coaches as a separate piece, but now we're like as a collaborative team, all working together for the same process. In the secondary, we did it as an audio club. There wasn't as much love of I want to videotape myself as a secondary math teacher of doing that. And so with this, then we coupled directly with them to figure out how we're going to move this forward. So we had professional development given from Tgfx with our secondary. So when teachers are talking about how much talk time and what it in secondary, it tends to have a little bit more prominently of direct instruction, at least in my district. I may be the only one, but we have a little bit more prominent of that, maybe with some more worksheets of doing this instead of this task-based approach, student-centered piece. And so having them there, like TeachFX, it was just amazing. Like we had worked with Joseph and Deborah, and they took it to the next level. So it's not just me as the district representative saying like, this is a quality way to teach of doing it. It is like all of us together, and it's building with like researchers and all those pieces. And so it became a very powerful movement going forward. And if you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
I'll show with the secondary, it ended up being like a very focused on specific ideas, but also in the background of it was always the reflective feedback, always focusing on small instructional routines. I heard in a quote, someone said, it's unprofessional to ask teachers to change more than 5 to 10% of their practice every year, but it's also unprofessional for teachers to not refine their practice 5% to 10%. So we really don't want to go after the entire classroom doing it and saying, change everything. You're not doing a great job, but really just how do we do those little practices that get it? And also coupling it in with mindsets and beliefs and collaborative and reflection. So on the next slide, it goes specifically with the things that we targeted with our secondary coaches. So as secondaries, we talked about student talk and wait time and sentence stems and different ways of like, would you rather of how to do it and student comprehension. And those were such powerful tools to get this into this mode. And I felt like it was just such a perfect starting place for us. So our secondaries at this place of like thinking about those of like sentence stems, but our elementary was really looking at like refining their practice and taking that practice to the next level. And we even talked about after they did video, after they did TeachFX, so they would plan together as a team to do their tasks. They would videotape it. They would individually reflect on that. And then they would look at their TeachFX and reflect even deeper. And like, how do you make it even stronger? Then come back as a district team. And we would say, now, how do we elevate our practice even more? And that discussion about like, it was great, but now we need to make it even more elevated, made it more powerful with the coach because they could follow on the TeachFX feedback to make it even like they didn't feel like when they were saying you're talking a lot of the time, it didn't need to be on the coach. It was more that teacher thought, oh my gosh, I'm talking all the time. I really need to stop talking so much.
Right.
So that was a great combination for us. Sorry, long time talking.
No, you're doing great. Yeah, and thank you. I'm so glad we have had the opportunity to see some of these visuals and of what you guys did and different grade levels and in different ways. And you spoke a little bit about this already, but I kind of want to hear more about the, we talked about integrating TeachFX into the support programs, but what about specifically those instructional coaches? Like how are instructional coaches using TeachFX in their own coaching conversations? And what was the effectiveness or, reason for doing that?
That is such a great question. So in some places, like we had it very systematic, like we had coaches who would do it and they would go and like have this follow-up and have this whole coaching cycle about it. But because of the flexibility of this program, it allowed us to have flexibility for each one of our schools. So the coaches could take it from where they were. Some coaches were not ready for a full coaching cycle around this piece, but it allowed a talking point to happen. So it could be individually site-based where coaches were really helping do this and it started this great conversation, but it was also just like teachers had an opportunity to try this. And once they tried it, it's kind of a little bit like chocolate candy or like just once you have some, you're like, oh, I'd like to know what if I recorded this part of my lesson? Or what if so it caused coaches to have even more reflections with teachers. And sometimes it was even a stop in the hall. So I'd have some coaches who would email me and say, oh my gosh, this teacher stopped me in the hall and really wanted to share their TeachFX with me. Or someone would email me, and because I can't see their data, and say, check out my TeachFX. Wait until you see what it looks like. It's so great. So just this building it with coaches to have them have the flexibility that it's not a district mandate. And I feel like that made it so much more alluring to teachers, that like they were using that. We'd have coaches collaborate and talk, how are they using it to make it stronger? Not us saying, this is how you need to use it and this is what needs to have happen.
Wonderful. Yeah. Do you want to take this opportunity to kind of get into the weeds a little bit in terms of how you were actually supporting teachers and using the app in their PD?
Oh, I would love that. Let me share my screen. And you know what I'm actually
Okay.
going to do? I'm actually just going to show you exactly what I would do with my teachers.
Perfect.
So I'm going to do, when I was doing professional development, I would just record myself. So I wanted to actually show, if I'm going to be the professional person doing it, that I'm like reflecting on my practice as well. And I think this site is so easy to use. So once you log in here, you can see up on the top, I can see the teacher and the students inside, and then these are my tasks that I've done down here to record. So let's just check out one. So you can see I had some high teacher talk time about doing it. And I was like, oh no, the horror. But I think sharing this and like talking about with teachers is so powerful. You just got to be open to like hearing it and talk about it. So let's just look at one. So I facilitated a task using goats and chickens. And so they had like 52 animals and how many legs. And so we were having, one of the key components of this is adults need to engage this task as adult learners, not pretending to be fifth graders, not pretending to be third graders. They need to engage in it because they don't have enough opportunities in math to engage in math how it should be taught. We tell them you should teach like this, but they don't ever get to experience it. So from this, look how awesome this is. So as soon as I got done, then this is what my teacher talk was, what kind of words I was using for academic language. I'm like, oh no, I'm doing it. And then what the students were talking about over here. And then I get to have my ratios. And what is amazing about getting the feedback is it like says you spoke for this and individual students for this. And then it asks you these great questions. There's no compelling that you have to answer them, but it really helps you think about like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then here's the visualized as a timeline, but check this sweet thing out. You can just click anywhere on it and I can see what's actually happening in that timeline. So super cool, Janet. And sometimes some teachers may say, oh my gosh, it's not transcribing exactly what it is. That is not the purpose of this program, to be a transcription tool, doing it. So this is the purpose of it, is to find patterns and trends on how people are talking about what you're doing in the math class of talking. So then it goes down here. Here's a complete transcript of it. And then there's short student responses that I can talk about. And then students spoke for 3 times or more. I'm like, oh gosh, I need to get more people talking. But one of my focuses for doing this task was building on contributions, doing it so I could see where my longest teacher talk time was. I'm like, oh goodness. But then here I had 0 examples of you passing the ball back to students for discussion. Love that it just says it like that. But then I have 55 examples of me building on students' contributions. So this was something I was focusing on. So I noticed once I started focusing on one key idea, some of my other numbers started going up. So I was like, but I think that's where it is. You want to make sure that if you're focusing on it, you have a goal that you really maybe just zoom down and you're like, I don't want to look at all those things. Maybe I really want to see like, how am I doing on passing the ball, or how am I building on that? And then there are 43 questions you asked, and they can see what kinds of questions I asked, and actually scripting out those questions. And then I rated them by DOK level and saw like what kinds of things is such a powerful practice. And I got zero open-ended questions. So like, so sometimes this is like, I love how it says like playing ping pong, which is in the research of doing that. And so this just gives you so much. Like I provided think time after you spoke only one time. Oh, that's not good. And then I didn't provide anything time after kids spoke. But I think when you share this as the adult person in the thing, then the teachers can feel, because they see this little line down here that says the national average for when teachers talk, and you're like, oh no, like here's the average of it. And if I'm building down into other things, it can make it great. So then even I've had people share with me their TeachFX and say, oh, look and see what's happening there. And you can see that you can have other people and you can talk to them about it and say, oh, I saw that. That's very interesting about doing that. So this is such a great tool to give me feedback, but also to give like positive feedback back to teachers about what's actually happening. But I call it positive feedback, but it really is positive, non-judgmental feedback about your pieces of that.
Amy, thank you so much for showing us that. And like your vulnerability with us is obviously what you're modeling for the teachers that you're working with. And I think that's a super powerful way to, encourage those teachers to also be reflective and want to improve, because you're saying, look, here's this. And like you highlighted, I mean, I'm amazed at your building on student contributions. I never get more than like 1 or 2. So I'm like, wow, Amy, great job. But there are other times where, there's just so much context in every class and every situation and every scenario. And I think knowing that you can focus in on one thing, or you can look at the overall and just say like, hey, I'm really just focused on, the big picture talk ratios or different things is a really powerful thing. So I'll go back to sharing my screen. You guys can see it, right? Okay. So Amy, the other thing, you got to show us your actual account, but we were going to share some of the trends within your district and kind of hear your reflections on working with us in this capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is one of the things that knowing how teachers are using this tool is kind of tricky a little bit at first, because it's all private to them, which is super important of doing it. When I was telling secondary teachers about this, some of them wanted to use their own like private email, and they were just worried about like how, like maybe I'm like collecting all this data and like kind of say like, guess what, this high school talks so much more than this high school, and like let's compare them. But you don't ever get data like that. What they do is they kind of give you updates of some general trends that are happening, and then it's just such a great discussion point. So this is one that Joseph brought up with the secondary teachers about how the student talk, of where the student talk is at, and like how it's fluctuating doing that, and like where teacher talk is, and silence and group talk. But one of the things he talked about that I thought was great, that was that silent and group talk is not necessarily like a negative or a positive. And teacher talk, like I have to say that some of my secondary teachers would push back a little bit on it. Like they need to talk. They need to tell them how to do it. They don't just know how to solve like quadratics without like us telling us how to do them. So we're not saying that you're like you can't talk. We just want to have more increased student talk, of doing that. And so it's not the teacher talking where they stand in front of the pieces of that, but it's always a struggle, because especially in the math world. So I think where TeachFX what made it great with this tool is that we would talk about these trends, but then the professional development that they gave was very much catered to me. Like I would say as a district, I would like this to be more mathy, or I would like this to be this. And they totally were like, okay, let's figure it out. Let's do this and like make it stronger this way. And like, let's adjust it that way. And so and then what kinds of feedback do we want to give? It was like very much like helping me see where it was going and what trends kind of were happening. And then there's one other trend slide of doing it that's on there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't click all the way through, so we didn't see the national averages as Jordan compares. But yes, here's this next insight.
Yeah, and so I think sometimes even like sharing stuff like this with long teacher stretches, like, oh, it can cause like a little bit of like concern from teachers, but at the same time, it is what it is. And so we need to, instead of like sugarcoating everything of what it is, sometimes we just need to say, okay, like, let's look at where it is. And like, we move our practice on a continuum. There isn't like a day that you'll become the great math teacher and you're done. And so this tool helps you push yourself farther down that continuum that's never ending. So it's just, yeah, so we're going to have times where there's ups and there's downs about doing it. And we want to still celebrate that we're moving down a continuum.
Ready for the next one? Okay, yeah. Anything more about that before I move on? Are you good?
Well, I think it's just like deciding what data that you share with teachers and how you share with it is super important. And like what kinds of questions that you're asking so that it doesn't become this punitive feel like of like that they're not teaching, or teachers will feel ashamed. And when teachers feel ashamed of their practice, they're less willing to share it, doing it. And so now it has to be like there is some wiggle room so that we can celebrate, even if it was like, I had a high school team who was like, oh my gosh, we were like at 99% like teacher talk time, and we like moved down to like 90 probably, like they're like doing it. And that thing of like celebrating that you're moving along there is so powerful, but it just doesn't come from telling them to talk less. It has to be coupling that with like good professional development that talks about what they can do that can help them talk less.
Yeah, and I go back to, I think about the slide you showed with the mindsets and beliefs right in the middle, and just having a culture where what we've just talked about, like you modeling your vulnerability, but the mindsets and beliefs about no teacher is perfect. We get to work on this together. It's a learning experience. I know on the product side for TeachFX, we've worked really hard to make sure that even the way that the data is presented, as you showed, is non-judgmental. We just say, this is what happened. And sometimes teachers might say, well, that was good. That was what I wanted, or that wasn't what I wanted. But it's not saying you did a good job or you did a bad job. It's just, this is what happened in your class. And so we see that that's where we can really help teachers, reflect on their practice and see if there are changes to be made. But I think to your point about the culture of the district and the school and being open and vulnerable and having a culture and a mindset and a belief about all of this is a really important underlying factor. And like, there's going to be things to celebrate always.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, can I
One of the other
that?
things we added to that was we did a theme for our elementary was all about football. Now, I'm not like a huge football player, and I don't even like really watch football, but the whole thing about football players is the moment they walk off the field that they go and watch film and they reflect and they get this quality feedback of doing it. And so how can we like take like, so then that's like, how can we take what football players are doing and reflect and use our and reflect on our practice and giving them that space for reflection and professional development instead of like me, I have to cover all these things and doing it. I need space where you can just reflect and talk about your practice. How did the planning go? We planned it together. Now, how did that happen? Is super powerful to there, and saying it is such a valued practice that very little teachers actually get to experience. Is it because it's like they're teaching, the next day they're teaching a new lesson, next day they're teaching a new lesson. And so it just becomes this like, oh, I'm just like running on a hamster wheel instead of thinking like, okay, if I did this instructional routine, like if I use this argument structure where I'm going to do a discussion, I can do that again and I can get better the next time. And I can do it again and it doesn't matter what the comment is.
Thanks. Joseph, you have a question?
Yeah. Amy, always great to see you. I was thinking about one of my favorite memories when we worked with your secondary teachers this year. As you were talking about ways to make it more reflective for the teacher, there was a session where we asked your teachers to open up a recent report that they had and look at moments of student talk when they had long stretches. And this was a memory that stands out for me because your teachers were diving into the data and reflective practice of their classroom. But what they were doing was they were identifying in that student talk, what was the student comprehension based on that talk? And all of a sudden, it wasn't about the numbers or the ratios or how many times this or that happened, but they were just diving into student comprehension. And I remember teachers were saying, oh, this was a moment of careless error. And, in a math classroom, that's not something to be upset about. That's actually a moment where we can laugh. And I forget the acronyms that some of your teachers mentioned, but it was sort of a moment where they could make it a moment of levity for their students. Whereas other moments, they really learned, oh, wow, my student understood it this way, which was different from the way that this student understood that. And we can celebrate those things in a math classroom. So it was so cool getting the chance to hear your teachers think through that process.
Yes, completely agree. Joseph was amazing. 100%.
And then, Amy, I think I tried to ask this question earlier, but I don't think I was super clear in the way I was asking, but I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how coaches used TeachFX in their coaching sessions. Like you showed your class report, but in the same way that maybe teachers use it in the classroom, and like, why would that even be something that you would want them to be doing?
So we had varying uses we had whole schools that would use the coaching for coaching cycles. And so teachers would where they would use a TeachFX, and then the coach would come back in to talk through it with them. And it's more of like what were kind of reflective questions, which was great. The TeachFX kind of already had some reflective questions, so the teacher could see what the report was and just talk about some of those. And then if they were focusing on like long teacher stretches or those pieces, like, which I want to go off this slide. I don't need to
Okay,
highlight this
sorry.
slide forever.
You're like, Becky, you're killing me.
I'm like, it's great, but I'm like, we've got to learn from it. Let's go to like a different side. Yeah. So doing it. But I think then that could help with coaches of where you can push that. Yes. And then like, how do you ask those questions? And so specifically, coaches could use it to help refine their coaching practice, how they talk to teachers, and what kind of data is meaningful to teachers. Because some people, and at first when I saw the word cloud, I have to say I was like, word cloud, thank you, no thank you. But then when I saw how teachers love the word cloud, absolutely love it, of doing it, then I thought, oh my gosh, like that, because it doesn't feed to me because I love the numbers, doesn't mean that it feeds to someone else. So then coaches saw that you can use different kinds of pieces of that to leverage your coaching practice to help that teacher move her practice forward of doing it. And we have to go with, teachers don't change their practice with things they don't want to work on. So this created a tool of doing it where teachers could choose stuff that they have more of a desire to work on than just to say, okay, the district has decided that we're going to do all academic language, and now we're going to get better, and we're going to move to like have 60%. That's not how teachers make change. I don't feel like. I feel like teachers make change by saying, I'm going to work on my questioning, or I'm going to work on my contribution, but I chose it. So then I see a need for that, so I can see the growth. And I saw that some teachers would work with coaches on things that they were already pretty good at. They were like killing it already. But then other people would choose things that they were like really had like a growth process to do. And this allowed it to be so exactly what Cheryl's saying, like actionable and totally like focused for them to go forward. Cheryl's another mentor that I've worked with. It just amazing.
And then I'm curious. So when you use TeachFX, you're not necessarily your students are the coaches, right? Are coaches TeachFXing their one? Sometimes, I guess you said it really varies on how schools and coaches are using it, but are coaches also using TeachFX in like just recording that one-on-one coaching conversation to then practice using the tool and for themselves as to become better coaches? Is that something that's happening as well sometimes?
It's not as well widespread as I would love it to be, because I think coaching cycles are like coaching, this academic coaching of all things, and having it be more of a focus on building on like coaching cycles is a new idea to our district that we're doing. But we do have coaches who totally caught onto that. And so when they're inside a coaching cycle, they could see how often they were asking questions and what kinds of questions and how much were they talking. And I think some of the coaches that reflected back on it were like, oh my gosh, I am talking so much more, or I'm advice giving. I'm just gift giving them of like, here's my gift of knowledge. Here's my gift of knowledge. Instead of like, we have to hit those beliefs and like go after like, how do we collaborate, or how can you ask those questions that make teachers be more reflective on their own practice? Because I can tell you everything I did as a sixth grade teacher, and I thought it was amazing. And somehow me imparting that to you as a coach isn't going to change a teacher's practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly the same thing with students, right? It's if I'm a teacher and I just tell my students everything, I'm just going to impart all my great wisdom on you. It's not going to stick, and they're not going to learn in the same way that if I give them opportunities to come up with ideas and lead the conversation and really, have ownership. And so in a coaching conversation, it should be the same, right? The coach should be asking their teacher that they're coaching lots of questions, getting them talking, because we're going to see the teacher learning and growing in that same way. Yeah, so I guess I think Rachel put in the chat, like if there are questions from the group, we'd love to hear. I'll go, I have one more big question for you, Amy, that I want you to think about, which is, what would you say to districts who are considering partnering with TeachFX? Sorry, there we go.
I think it is such a powerful tool to give feedback to teachers that is very much needed in this time of doing it. And if you don't have the infrastructure to give that individualized feedback for teachers, because maybe like my department only has like 3 people in it, and so we're trying to work with like 62 schools. So that it's very, very much like a huge for us. But I think that if you're looking for this tool that can give such meaningful, good feedback, coupled with just really good, high quality professional development that can be catered to your school district, to exactly what your needs, this is such a great way to go forward with that idea.
Thanks, Amy. And now for the folks that are here with us, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to just unmute or raise a hand. And if you have specific questions about, exactly what Amy's doing in Jordan, or certain even grade levels or areas, or broader questions like, why is mathematical discourse even important to you?
I saw someone asked about how do I launch this tool with teachers to create interest and excitement about using this. Okay, so I launched the elementary with coaches. So I was like, this is going to be an amazing experience. The only way your teachers can come is if you come. So like that, and then I advertised it to teachers. And so lots of teachers said that they wanted to be a part of it. I paid more than the stipend, so I did pay really well. So I offered a good heavy stipend for doing that. When you go over $1,000, it has an appeal to teachers. And so I paid a good heavy stipend because they're going to be reflecting and videotaping themselves and audio taping themselves a lot. But I also had this where it was like I advertised to coaches and told them to do, but then when I advertised to teachers, it's all about bringing joy. Like I had to have a really fun flyer and like, this is going to be awesome to do it with it, because I think at math, sometimes we can be boring and we can be like, come to math professional development, doing it, but it has to be like this exciting piece of it. So that it can be more meaningful going forward. And with our secondary people, I went to the principals. So I actually went to the principals of the high school and said, here's your scores. Here, this is where they're sitting in the middle school and the high school. This is where your school is sitting of doing it. And we have some room to grow of doing it. And I said, here's a great tool that we have that can allow them to reflect. So principals told teachers that like, hey, this might be a great thing for you to go forward and to use.
Great. There's been a lot more questions in the chat. I can answer a couple of them in terms of just our teachers using this tool for more than 1 year. With Jordan, we will continue to use it. They've already have basically a year under their belts, and we'll just keep going. Many of our partnerships are multi-year. We know change and all of that does take time. So we really like to partner with districts and schools. Like we're in it for the long haul, and we see, that sometimes the graphs look like this, right? As we talked about earlier. And then to Norma's question about how often teachers and coaches might use TeachFX, I think it really depends on the teacher, the coach, the school culture, the structure. Amy, would you want to add anything to that specifically?
As a part of my requirement for secondary is that they, for taking the course, I set a weekly that they had to weekly TeachFX their classroom of doing it. And I feel like many teachers did more than weekly of happening with that piece of it, but it was a part of their assignment to do it, because I don't think sometimes if it wasn't a part of their assignment, but there's no way for me to really check if they did it. I just did a quiz like, did you do your TeachFX? But because I can't see their data, but just setting that expectation, because I don't think that they can see as much growth or as much change if they only have like a couple little pieces in there. And then Stacy asked about how it works for virtual teachers. It is the bomb for virtual teachers. I have an online high school and middle school who use it, and they get great feedback about who's talking, what's doing this. And it just works seamlessly inside of Zoom.
Yeah, it's kind of like a super powered version. You get a handful of insights that are in the virtual setting, which is pretty cool. What I think would be great, Amy, Carrie's question is, could you outline the sequence of a coaching cycle with the TeachFX tool? I think that would be a great way to kind of overview what that looks like.
Oh, awesome. So always with any sort of starting with a coaching cycle, it really is just sitting down with that teacher and saying like, what are we wanting to focus on? What are we looking for of doing that after they have pre-planned together, like plan together, whatever they're out, kind of what they want to do. Then they go in and they videotape themselves. If in the elementary, they would videotape themselves and TeachFX themselves. The combination is so powerful. I cannot tell you the combination, because then they can say, oh, look what happened there is just a great tool. And then once after they've done that, then they personally reflect by themselves. I think that's important, because you don't want to look at the TeachFX tool for the first time with your coach, like at all. It is too painful for them, and that's too sensitive. This is their practice. And so we keep their practice private, like a little, so they have a moment to sit with it and think about what they saw. And then they can choose with their coach what they choose to share. So then some coaches would mean some teachers would just choose snapshots, screenshots of part of their thing. They would not share all of TeachFX with the coach of doing it. They could just share a piece of it. But then that was the coach would talk about and reflect how it went with the teacher. So really it is the teacher saying like, how did your lesson go on a rate of 1 to 10? Teacher says 6, great. Wow, what can you do next time to make it more of a 10? The teacher says 2, what could we do next time to make it more of a 10? Because if I immediately go in, what's going to happen is they go in and say, what happened? Like, what did you think? Was it great? Then that teacher becomes an evaluator, or that coach becomes an evaluator. And that's not part of our coaching cycle. We want it to be like, how do you think it went? What evidence are you seeing? Can you look in the TeachFX? Those kinds of pieces, so that it goes back on the teacher and we're not evaluating, we're actually coaching.
Thanks, Amy. Another question I think is Evelina, how did you launch this with secondary without school-based coaches?
Well,
It's a
awesome.
little
So in our
different,
second,
right?
yeah, a little different. So in secondary, we do have school-based coaches, but they're by period. So, and it's just a new idea of, and so they did not go with us because they're selling their preps basically, because it's, and so but with them all there, we introduced TeachFX to them. And so they could use this to support their math teachers that were going through it. But what ended up happening is once they started supporting their math teachers, it leaked out to the school. And so then people were like, I would like it. And social studies, English, science, they like jump on this like hotcakes, they love this discussion thing of doing that. So for me, it caused like a leakage of this. And so it's hard to contain it just to one subject area of doing it. So the coaches would support as they had their prep period, but really this was really focused with at least in my preliminary start, that's where we're starting with just the teachers. And then we're going to branch out to more of a piece as we build our coaches and we build our teachers.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, like what we're doing in Jordan is for Jordan, and there's other schools and districts that have other structures and needs and might be focused school-based. And they might not even have instructional coaches in some schools. That's in districts, depending on the roles. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can partner with folks, and we try to embed into the structures that you have and what your goals are. So it doesn't have to look a certain way just because that's how it worked in Jordan, if that makes sense. Let's see, other questions that I'm seeing in the chat. Am I missing any? Taryn
asked about that. Yeah, about the recordings. I think that I love to have kids be aware of it, doing it and talking about it and just be transparent that we're improving our practice. There isn't a requirement to let kids know because it's just an audio recording of it, but I love doing it. And I actually had a whole school after they TeachFX to their kids, then doing it, they actually share it with their children. And they talk about how are we improving our math talk as mathematicians? And so then they look at it and say, like, what were you building on it? And how can we have less of a ping pong discussion of like teacher, student to more of a volleyball discussion. And that with using TeachFX made a very powerful experience with students.
Yeah, we talk about it often like a Fitbit, right? Which now Fitbits are kind of like not as cool, but when they first came out and you put your Fitbit on, like, of course you were going to get 10,000 steps because yeah, you're aware of it. But I think to Joseph's point, it's like building those muscles, that muscle memory about when they start thinking about it and talking about it. And yeah, it's good. It's all good. I'm going to bring us back. Feel free to keep putting questions in the chat if there are any, but I just kind of want to bring us back to these reflection questions here, kind of frame our conversation that we had today. How do you define student engagement in your math classroom? How can instructional coaching be more teacher-centered? And what one new idea will you bring back to try? Anyone want to share out those answers or have questions that have come up from kind of thinking back to these framing questions? I'm practicing my wait time, my think time, giving you all an opportunity to think. All right, well, we would love to keep the conversation going. If folks have more questions and want to hang out on the Zoom, we'll be here for a while. And then you have my contact info and Amy's contact info up there. We so appreciate you guys coming today and sharing with us and asking questions and engaging, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.